Hi everyone, I just wanted to say that I am an employee somewhere, so all these views are personal and they don't reflect my current employer at the moment. Just letting you all know that.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the Let's Like Social Innovation podcast. I hope you've had an amazing start to your week, but if not, we can kickstart that right here. I'm your host, Ian Kahinde, and y'all, you know what I always got to do. I got to get through the bulletin board. So first things first, October 20th, the deadline is this week for envisioning a Just Pittsburgh art submissions, the second call for art. As I have been saying the last month and a half, if you have a talent to share with the community, you would be doing yourself and the community a disservice to not share it. There are cash prizes, so feel free to look on the link or click on the screen. If you're watching, click on the link in the description wherever you're watching or listening to find out the criteria for envisioning a Just Pittsburgh. There are cash prizes, so keep that in mind. Secondly, if you would like to come on this podcast, like our incredible Vidya right here, there is a nominations link in the link tree, which you will be able to find in the description of this episode. If you would like to nominate someone to come on or apply yourself to be a guest on this podcast, feel free to fill that out and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Lastly, as I am a senior and I will be graduating shortly, we are looking to hire a paid intern to learn how to take over the ropes of this podcast. So if you are either an honor student or looking to become an honor student, look for the host interest form in the link tree that can be found in the description of this episode, and we'll see if we can work something out. Now, everything else aside, the whole reason why we're here, we have the incredible Vidya Surti. We will be talking through her backstory, what makes her who she is. And then in the second half, after our artist spotlight, we'll be touching on the topic of youth empowerment. But introductions done. Vidya, how are you feeling today?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. The audience doesn't know this, but we fought ghosts.
Yeah, we literally fought like the alumni hall ghost. It was crazy. We almost died.
Oh, yeah.
We almost lost our way.
Speaking of alumni hall, the reason we are in alumni hall is because Vidya is a recent graduate of the Frederick Honors College.
I am. I'm so glad to be one too. It's done so much for me, and I wouldn't be the person that I am without, the FHC. So.
Shout out Dean Foote.
Shout out Dean Foote.
But anyways, everything else aside, take me from the beginning, Vidya.
Yeah, I feel like there's a couple things that I'd like to touch on that like really have formed, I guess, the crux of my identity. So I guess I am Indian American, but I'm also like of Fijian Indian descent. And so that's been something I've been grappling with my whole life because I don't know, recently me and my mom and my dad were having a discussion and they're like, oh, you're a Pacific Islander, because my mom was like, oh, I'm from Fiji and my entire lineage of like ancestors is from Fiji, so you should put Pacific Islander, like, on those like check boxes
like
for like race.
Stuff,
yeah. I'm just like, well, I'm not like Melanesian or Polynesian, so I don't know if I should. So that really got me thinking. But before, like, just growing up having, that like different flair to being Indian, like different cuisine, really good food, really good seafood, so good. But also, having, that, I guess, knowledge of the Pacific and going to like Fiji when I was young. I was actually there for like a month. In like second or third grade for like personal reasons. Hadn't remembered till now, but having lived there, having been around family, I remember my mom's sister, or no, my mom's dad's brother's wife. See, it's like a whole like family living in that like apartment complex. Like she was just like making like prawns, and I just remember sitting with her and like de-skinning or deveining the prawns, and I like just those memories, like they've held so like deeply in my like heart. And even going into college and going into figuring out my identity and who I identify as, I definitely, think of Fiji very proudly. I definitely rep it. I love being an island girl. But I haven't been in a while, too, so that's why I sort of, grapple with it. And a lot of my family, because of economic issues, have moved from Fiji to New Zealand. So there's definitely, like, that loss that I feel, as well as, that connection that still holds strong.
Are you a master chef?
No, I'm not actually that good of a cook.
I heard the prawns at a
Oh
young
my
age.
God.
I'm like starting young.
No, yeah, it didn't really work. I love seafood though. Like I really love, the cuisine. Like even just recently my mom was making like coconut fish, and that's something that is eaten there a lot, and they eat a lot of duck there actually, which is so like funny. So whenever I see like a lot of duck like curry dishes, I'm like, Maybe I'll try
I'm
someday.
glad that's where that conversation went. I thought you were going to be like, whenever I see a duck crossing the street, I get hungry.
So I'm actually like scared of like ducks alive. Like one time, oh my God. One time I was at this like park, and a bunch of ducks, I was like really young, but a bunch of ducks just like chased me.
Oh wow.
So yeah,
this is the formative experience.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, other than, like visiting Fiji and visiting India, like because I have at least like once, because my parents like wanted like me and my siblings to like see India. We actually did like a tour of like different like major cities, which was like crazy at the time in elementary school, but it really like showed me how like different these sorts of like ways of life are. And it's not that they're more relaxed, but I really, am inspired by the culture of, like, the Fijian Indians and the culture of, like, going and visiting, like, Gujarat and, like, Mumbai. And it, like, really, even today when I'm with my friends, like, we always pull up to like Bollywood night or a lot of these like Garba events, and it just feels like I'm repping that Indian side too. So that's like, I guess, the foundations. Going into high school, I actually faced a lot of health issues. So I was diagnosed with gluten intolerance, which sucked. I was so bummed. I was like, my life is over. But no, it wasn't over. It was just like significantly harder to like, find food that was like nutritious and stuff that like, and as good as like bread and like wheat. Like, it's so hard. I mean, it's gotten easier as of, like, late when people have been sort of, like, adopting this gluten-free diet. But it's gotten, pretty rough and challenging, like, throughout high school. I also, so in my spring of senior year, right before the pandemic, I got my wisdom tooth removed. And before this, I'd been like, I was at my lowest in terms of energy. There were some days I couldn't get up out of bed, and I was so confused, and I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to explain it either, right? But after I got my wisdom tooth removed, like my face started like, it really bad side effects.
Pretty.
Yeah, it was not pretty. Like, it felt like there were like two like golf balls in my cheeks, and like my entire body was in like so much pain. I was like, what is going on? And so I went through this whole like rabbit hole of like doctors. So first I went to urgent care, and I remember the urgent care doctor telling me to go to the ER because my half of my back was swollen. Yeah, it was just swollen, and there was no explanation as to like why that happened, but this was after, the wisdom tooth removal. So I was like, okay, and my mom's like, okay, and so we go to the ER, and they do all these tests, they do all these like imaging, ultrasounds, like I think an MRI, but they literally just couldn't figure out what was happening to me. And so I went to a couple other doctors in my PCP, and they sort of pieced together that I had amplified musculoskeletal pain syndrome in the juvenile form, and in the juvenile form, it's amplified musculoskeletal pain syndrome, but in the adult form, it's fibromyalgia, which is like muscular like pain that persists, throughout like a long stretch of time, and it's idiopathic, so there's no cause. So I've been living with that and trying to, contemplate that as someone who didn't really know how to like talk about their pain to a lot of these like providers. Like I remember one specialist actually in Shadyside, she was like, because I was in Pittsburgh for my last 2 years of high school. I was in Dallas for my first 16 years of living, so that was definitely an adjustment too.
An experience, especially as an Indo-Fijan.
Yeah, and so like they went and they were asking me why, like, what type of pain do you feel? Is it like an ice pick? Is it like dull? Like can you describe it? And I was like, I don't know what's going on. I just know it hurts. Like she was like, the doctor was like, pick a number from 1 to 10. How much does it hurt? I was like, I don't know. Like, how can I even quantify that? So being that young and going through that amount of pain and finally, getting, the answer, which took a while, but I got it. I went into college at that point because it was like it was COVID, but it was going into my freshman year of college, just being like, well, like, I don't think this is the way that things should be. I feel like people should be, getting an answer if they're in pain and shouldn't have to go through this, like, journey or, like, twists and curves of, like, non-answers or, like, oh, everything's fine, like, you don't have anything wrong with you, that type of dismissal as well. And so these two sort of like things have really, come together during my collegiate experience. So I don't know if I should go into that right now, but that's sort of the underpinnings of like why I made the choices I did today.
How did it contribute to your collegiate experience?
Yeah, so I was someone that went in pre-med because I wanted to learn like the biological underpinnings, and so I completed the pre-med track. But I also I used to be a neuro major, so like in my first year I was like, oh, I'm gonna do neuro because I want to understand the neurological underpinnings of pain, yada yada yada. But as I grew more into my classes, I started realizing that pain is more of like a social, like an emotional experience, and so I really wanted to understand that. And so when I took anthropology, cultural anthropology with Dr. Yearwood, he's great. I love that guy. He was my first like research advisor. He really opened up my eyes to like such a breadth of like social like science and anthropology, and so I decided to major in anthropology because I wanted to understand the social and emotional and even, ethnographic experiences of like pain, because for me it wasn't about, the C fibers or the A delta fibers are messing me up. It's more so like, well, I navigated myself through that with help, but how do other people navigate themselves through a healthcare system when their pain is just so misunderstood or just unknown? How do people in pain, navigate themselves through, society, through the economy, like all of those questions? And that also led me to like disability studies and, a lot of the extensive work that I've done around that and like disability advocacy and justice.
So where does FHC come into play with this?
The FHC, oh my gosh, so many ways. So I wasn't an FHC, I didn't apply coming in, getting being in the honors college. At that point, it was like the UHC, but I wasn't like a university honors college student. But I applied for Brackenridge because I wanted to, understand pain and create like a platform for people in pain in Latin America who are like underserved, who face economic and social hardship. And so that was my first taste of the honors college. And so I worked with an NGO to help develop that platform. And then after that, it was just like smooth sailing from there. Gone to the honors college. I did a bunch of these fellowships. Like I did research on like music venues in like pain. There's so much. There's literally so much.
Give me like the spark notes of music venues in pain.
Yes.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah, so it was through the Humanities Center Fellowship, but I was the Honors College awardee. And so I was going to do something that was at first very theoretical. It was like, oh, let me study pain scales. But then I was like, wait, I like music a lot. Why can't I study music? And so I was like, well, scales can also mean music. But I didn't want to do something theoretical. I wanted to do something ethnographic too. And so I don't know if you've heard of the Mr. Roboto project, but it's so fun. It's literally like so great. One of my friends actually put me on. And so I'd been going there for a long time, and I really like the scene. I really like the vibe. And I find that I feel like so good, like after like going like to one of their shows and just, like being in the vibe, even if it's like almost empty. I feel like, the people there are just so supportive. And so I decided to, study the Mr. Roboto project as like a site of social healing, of like social pain. And so that was a whole summer just spent on getting IRB approval, like interviewing people, like ethnographically, like observing like concerts, which I got to go to like for free. So that was great.
That's a plus.
Yeah, that's a plus. And I also got really close to like a lot of, the people who run the space, and I have the utmost respect for them, and hopefully I can like get that project like finished, because it's like I presented it at a couple of conferences, but I definitely want to put it out there in some form. But yeah, it was really great to hear some responses without like identifying anyone, of course, but like people have called it like a painkiller for them, for like their like the pains of like the world and the pains of society. And so I really resonated with that, and I am so glad I had the opportunity to get paid to do that, because it was such an amazing experience. So thank you, Honors College, and thank you, Humanities Center.
Heard on that.
Exactly.
So then moving forward, where does empowerment fit into your life?
Oh my God, in so many ways. So I feel like this, tension between youth empowerment and disability empowerment really like shine through. I think, for me being that young, like I definitely, feel like I wanted to empower, youth to have their own voice and to, develop, these skills to, take on their own challenges in the world. And I also, have examples where it's very heavily leaning into the disability advocacy side, advocating for people in pain, advocating for people who can't speak up for themselves, advocating for people who, can't get out of bed every day and can't participate in society the way that they want to. And, two examples of these, or multiple examples, but examples that fit into these two buckets. One is with youth empowerment. I'm vice chair currently of Queen's Gambit, and so that's an organization run by the wonderful Ashley Lynn Priori, who's also an honors college alum, graduate. And so she just graduated a couple years before all of us, but she runs that organization. She's amazing. Shout out Ashley. But part of, or the focus of that organization is to empower youth through chess, and especially, these marginalized populations, which is something that, when I've become vice chair, I really want to focus on is like, how do we, embed like diversity? How do we empower women and girls? How do we empower, like youth who are disabled through chess? Like a lot of, strategies to make sure that we're reaching with like instructors who are actually youth and that know chess, are going into these sites like throughout Pittsburgh, throughout the greater Pittsburgh area, and are teaching chess to like underserved populations and youth. That's really the goal is to, not only teach them chess, but to teach them strategy, to make, decisions, to make decisions that are like tactical, and for that to carry into, their future careers. And so I wish I had that. I wish I had, that sort of support, because I guess for me, it felt like I was fumbling around in high school, not of my own fault, but I just felt like I didn't have the resources to, have that confidence or, succeed with those like struggles, both health and like externally. So high school is already like hard as it is, right? Like with, that unidentified pain situation, it only got worse and, decreased my confidence. But that's sort of the goal. And through that, I've sort of, created like a long-term and short-term like strategy for like how we do partnerships and how we, carry across, Pittsburgh, because I feel like that's super important, and we want like a wide array and swath of like children to, be exposed to, chess teaching and, the like this, sort of empowerment. And so that's more on youth empowerment, but for disability empowerment, it's actually, I sort of stumbled into it. So I don't know if you know this, but there was this Pittsburgh Humanities Festival a couple years back, but I was actually on a panel with Mayor Gainey, and one of the questions I asked him was, you have all these city commissions and boards and coalitions, why are there no like youth members? So it was really like a youth empowerment thing at first, because I was like, why is there not any, youth members on these like coalitions, boards, task force? And he was like, that's true. And so I got selected to be on the city county task force for people with disabilities after that. Amazing group. Just learning, the ropes of that organization and that task force and what they do was really incredible, and the voice that they gave to the city's like disabled populations and how that connects to government. That was super important to me because I felt like I was making a lot of actionable change. I helped create like a secretary position to which is currently me, to make sure that communication was at the forefront of everything that we do, because it's super important not to get, lost in the weeds and to communicate very clearly, and to make everything accessible as possible. And from that, I actually was in California a couple of months ago to visit Loyola Law School and Loyola Marymount University, and so I'm part of their Quella Law Fellows.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, so I really had to think about that, but it's run by an excellent group over there, learning, a lot of legal advocacy and, court cases where people with disabilities have been represented, and also it's very legal focused if you want to go to law school and stuff like that, and if you have a disability as well. But I'm also going to be working on a project through that fellowship where it focuses on pain and medication access, because that's super important to me as well. It's not that there's these two spheres of disability rights that I think are at the forefront of, medical versus social models of disability. Most people think that they're very separate. I think that they're very, intertwined, because I feel like, the access to medication is such a social problem, an economic problem, that, when you're faced with, like, your insurance doesn't cover a medication that you need to, like, stand up every day. Like, what do you do? You have no insurance. What do you do? Like, all of those questions, like, you can't afford, like, this certain medicine. This certain medicine, is not available to the public. Or there is no, like, medicine for your, like, certain disability. It's things like this where, I am really passionate about, because for me, like, there is a medicine for fibromyalgia, but it is very reactive rather than proactive. So I take it and it relaxes my muscles when I'm tense, but it doesn't really do much, like, to, it's not like a cure. To say, which is, in a lot of, like, disability studies work, a lot of people see, like, the cure as very diminutive, but I think, for me, it's not looking for a cure, but looking for a solution for everyone that I think is the most important. And I think that, ensuring equity in that process is also the most important. I think everyone should have equitable access to medications that they need to survive.
So we'll be getting more into the side of empowerment in the second half of the pod. But before we hit this week's artist spotlight, what is the greatest piece of life advice you can pass on to our audience?
Oh my gosh. I think someone told me recently to fail early. So make mistakes early, because it's lower stakes, right? If you're on this project and you fail early, it's not like you're messing up the entire project, right? But if you also fail early, you realize something that you wouldn't have realized before. And so then you can move forward. And I really like that approach.
I think, like, that statement, fail early, I think it also means feel free to spread your wings when you're young.
Yeah.
Because that's when you have the least things holding you back.
I agree.
I really like that.
Yeah. I really liked it too.
Now, getting into this week's artist spotlight, we'll be playing the song Bada Bing by Secret Tunnel. I hope y'all enjoy.
A friend of the owner of this bar said that your service rate wasn't up to par, so they complained to the only one in charge of your at-will employment.
Hope y'all enjoyed this week's artist spotlight, Bada Bing by Secret Tunnel. You'll be able to find the artist page linked in the description of this episode, whether you're watching or listening. Now, getting into the second half of this week's episode, we are still on our topic of power in academia. Now, this week's topic will be youth empowerment. So I leave the floor open to you.
Yeah. Once again, continuing my journey, or like jumping around a bit. Like I even feel like I stumbled around a bit in college at first, even though I was like spreading, my wings. I was getting involved in all these like activities and this research. I still, hadn't really landed on what I felt was like home. But then in my sophomore year, I took this, Ailing Bodies Narratives in Health and Illness class. It was a French class, and my favorite professor, actually, Dr. Kalyan Ung, she's my favorite professor now, but before I didn't know that, she taught it. And so I really focused on, that, class, and I also TA'd for that class. So I created, this platform or this learning platform to learn digital humanities and critical disability studies at the same time, and I taught it to, a bunch of people my age. So at that time, I still considered myself, really young, and people, in that class, whether they were disabled or not, I feel like the conversations that were had around disability, they were definitely hard, but it was reflective of a very young generation that was open to a lot of new ideas and critical thinking, and the sort of ability to understand where other people are coming from. Not that it's just a new generation thing, but I feel like everyone being around the same age and being pretty young in their collegiate careers, like a lot of freshmen and sophomore who are looking to go into healthcare professions, that really sparked a lot of interesting conversations. I later, it's actually accepted work in a publication now, so I wrote about that teaching methodology, and I feel like it was super important because it felt like people were cared for and seen. And so I feel like a lot of youth empowerment as well, it's important to ensure that they feel care throughout the process of empowerment, because I feel like sometimes it is hard. Even for me, I'd say it's hard to, balance everything and to go about, being a young person in a lot of these spaces where nonprofit boards, I'm on a couple of them, as well as Queen's Gambit. I didn't start with Queen's Gambit either, and so it was an adjustment, being in these spaces as a 19, 20, 21-year-old when a lot of these people are in their 40s. No offense, right? But it was definitely, a little isolating at times, and, at times I wish I had more of a support system, but I think embedding that, throughout academia is super important, and it also builds confidence for people to empower themselves and to empower others.
Was what made it difficult for you, was it more a social difference or was it a power dynamic?
I feel like everyone is super supportive. I think it was more of a thing where I didn't feel confident enough to, state my opinion without seeming really juvenile or with a lack of understanding of the subject matter. I just felt what's that phrase that people are people get into this really good college and they're imposter syndrome. That's what I definitely felt. Although I learned and I understood later on that I definitely deserved to be there and to give that voice to empower others. I definitely felt a sense of imposter syndrome just because I was why am I here? What am I doing? What are these huge budget numbers? What is this? So
how did you work through that imposter syndrome?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I just think, starting to speak up, even though I thought it was wrong, that actually broke through the ice a little bit, and getting to know the other board members of each of the organizations was super important as well. They're all super supportive, and I'm glad I got to know them because they all come from such, diverse backgrounds, right? Coming from, that diverse standpoint, bridging that intergenerational gap was so, important, and I think it's so necessary to, have, that sort of diversity on a board, and, other people who fight for that change will agree. I also think asking a lot of questions. This is something I try to do at least. I always ask certain questions. I'm oh, could you send me this, budget report or this piece of information? If it's documented anywhere, I'd love to learn more about it. And so I guess learning the history of the organization also made me feel more confident because I could reference like, oh, so and so did this like 2 to 3 years ago, or this happened at this time, and look at the outcome of this, right? And so that was also really, really helpful.
So what would you say the impact of youth empowerment is, both inside organizations and outside in general life?
Yeah, so in organizations, I feel like, especially when it's, people who are serving other youth, like for Queen's Gambit, I definitely feel like, I'm able to, engage with instructors in a very like comfortable way. Like there's that sense of trust in that bond, and where like, oh, like they're able to tell me things without, feeling scared, and I'm able to connect with them on that way. And so I really think in that sense of the role, I'm, a good fit, or someone young would be a good fit, because they would definitely know and understand some of the struggles that they're going through. In terms of like the boardroom in general, I feel like it's super important to also, have youth represented not only in the boardroom but also in the organizations that and the people that are being served. For example, when like Radiant Hall is one of the boards that I'm on, and when they do a pop-up market, you'd want, a certain diversity of like generations for like different artists, right? Like things like that come into mind, or like intergenerational, artist studios. Like how young should we be renting and fronting costs for some of these artists who like rent studios, right? That's something that I'm really interested in, as well as the accessibility part of like, oh, are studios ADA accessible? Are people with disabilities being represented? And Radiant Hall is doing a great job of like being aware of like what's happening as well. I'm also on this board, recently joined Licework of Western Pennsylvania, and so they provide significant work experience and support for people with disabilities. And so being, again, the youngest one there, it's important that, throughout this process, like a lot of the vocational skills that are learned, like youth are represented, and that, that community is also, fostered outside of the boardroom. In terms of, in general, it's super important, even right now, for people to vote, for people to get out there and to speak up about what they believe in, no matter what it is, because I feel like it's important to have that sense of identity and to stand up for what you believe in, and to, go after injustices wherever you might see them, especially, as someone, who is young, who will be going through the next like stages of their life. And, for me, it's like, well, I don't want to settle in a world where it's like, I don't want to settle for less. I don't want to do the bare minimum and get away with it. I want to live in a world where it's sort of, we're doing our best and we're advocating for people that, can't advocate for themselves. And we are making sure that we are demanding, the best out of like everyone.
What role does the youth play in diversity, equity, inclusion?
So much. I mean, even just thinking about like surface level, like intergenerational, diversity. I feel like youth is such like a huge change maker, especially at the FHC. With youth empowerment. I know the Social Equity Research Hub, one of my best friends went to the UN to advocate for racial equity.
Shout out Magna.
But even things like, serving on like DEI committees, like as someone who's like super young, like you're advocating for that student voice, like you're advocating for that youth voice in a place traditionally in academia that it isn't necessarily, interface. Like, I know our DEI committee right now, which I'm continuing to serve on, it's faculty, it's Ron, shout out Ron, it's students, it's alumni, it's very inclusive, and a lot of good, honest discussions and conversations are made on how to improve and how to make things better. And I really think that that is, again, something that I want a world. That's something that I want to be. Oh my God, it's so late.
You're good.
It's something that, I won't settle for less. It's sort of something like that. I want to constantly, improve and to become more diverse and to become more accepting, accommodating, understanding as a society, as a school, as a community. And Pittsburgh is such a great place for that as well.
If students don't speak up for themselves, then who else?
Exactly, and representing their interests by those channels, but also through like public forums and through speaking with like leadership. One thing I will say about Dean Foote, she's lovely, she's amazing. She makes time for her students, and she makes time to speak to them and hear their thoughts about certain things happening in the Honors College. And I really like that approach because she has changed so much like through her leadership. Like, it is amazing. Like, my first year of Pitt compared to my last year, it's like a complete 180. And so she didn't settle for less, and I don't want to settle for less. So I think in that case, Dean Foote and like older people, older generations, making sure that youth have like that voice at a table is super important as well. Because how are you going to get there?
Mm-hmm. Now, if we could tie this entire topic of youth empowerment up with a bow, how would you summarize it?
Oh man, I guess for me, youth empowerment is standing up and advocating for everyone and the best interests of everyone, and making sure that, youth aren't a voice that is undermined or, underappreciated or even like underspoken, because it's so important that everyone has an equitable say and an equitable experience through not only college, but through their career, through their life, through, society, even going back to that, like, anthropological level. So, continuing to, learn and to advocate for others and to make sure that, youth have a voice in your organization or your college, like, or your workplace, right? Like, figure out ways in which, that works the best for you, but make sure that you're always keeping yourselves like accountable and making sure that they always have a place at the table. That's what I'll say.
Well said.
Thank you.
Now, before we get out of here, my last question for you.
Yeah.
What does the future hold for Vidya Surti?
Oh my God, the future. That's really scary. But right now I'm studying for my LSATs, so I want to go to law school, and I'm currently aiming to take that around next year. I am taking a couple years off to work, though, and I feel like that was a good decision because it's really going to challenge me to grow. It's really going to challenge me in a new environment in which I'm constantly learning new things. And so right now, I'm working in a nanomedicine lab. That's all I can really say. Signed an NDA. But I guess that shift to more of like a harder science is really, interesting, and it's really hard at times, but I think it's super rewarding. And, going back to, accessible medication, that's something which I want to carry throughout my entire career. And so I'm hoping that this experience will sort of like catalyst that.
Well, me personally and everybody watching is wishing you the best of luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you so much.
Now, is there anything else you'd like to get across to the audience before we get out of here?
Not much. Hail to Pitt, and thank you so much for the Frederick Honors College for supporting me for all of these years. I couldn't have been the person that I am without their support today.
Now, as always, every organization mentioned in this episode, there will be resources in the description. Whether you're watching or listening, you'll be able to find them. This has been another amazing week of the Let's Talk Social Innovation podcast. I am so thankful that you were able to make it out, Vidya.
Thank you.
And this is your host, Ian Kahinde. We are signing off. Peace out, everybody.